You said you didn't ask for this, but that's not true.
I thought discovering my past would bring a sense of belonging. But I was wrong.
Welcome patrons! We are finally at the end of the charity stream videos. This time with a suggestion of the valedictorian of my class, Nina, who requested that I do a video on Fenris. So it's been a hot second, so let's finally do some lore on this channel. Jesus. But anyway, let's talk about the most Final Fantasy looking character that isn't in a Final Fantasy game, the Runaway Slave, Leto? Childhood. An elven boy named Leto, along with his mother and sister Verania, was enslaved in the Deventer Imperium and owned by a magister named Denarius. It's unknown if Leto was actually born a slave or if his parents were enslaved later in his childhood. However, in the Blue Wraith comics, Denarius calls Leto his pet, making it seem like he had known him for at least a little while. Fenris tells Hawk that at one point he was told that he was from Saharon, but we aren't sure how true this is. Denarius was fascinated with Lyrium, and much of his research revolved around pushing the boundaries of what this substance could do. At one point, he stumbled on an ancient treatise that talked of embedding Lyrium beneath the skin, giving a person unique abilities. He became obsessed with this idea, and spent years researching and perfecting this concept. When it became time to choose someone to be branded, he knew he needed a strong subject, one that would survive the process without flinching, as it would ruin the branding of the Lyrium. To find the perfect subject, he created a small contest of arms against his favorite slaves, announcing the winner to receive a boon from him. Slaves battled for riches, privileges, and even the chance to marry, but Leto signed up to win freedom for his mother and sister. Leto's determination was what impressed Denarius the most, and so was chosen to receive his mysterious gift and the boon. His mother and sister were freed and even given a small amount of gold to start their new lives. The small family were given one final goodbye, and Leto was never seen again. So right off the bat, we need to have a little chat about retcons. Retcons can be kind of frustrating in fandoms and lore as they make things a little confusing, but sometimes they can do some good. Sometimes retcons make things gel a little better down the line. Now, the newer comics that came out not too long ago slightly altered Fenris' backstory. While I'm actually perfectly fine with this new edition, I'm going to talk about both versions, as some of the repercussions of this retcon have really yet to be seen, and probably will likely have echoes in Dragon Age Dreadwolf. What the truth actually is, I'm not sure, but I imagine that if Fenris pops back up in the lore and talks about his history, BioWare will meet somewhere in the middle of these two stories. The original version. The only record of this process of branding Leto comes from letters from a man named Silas to his lover. Who is Silas? Who is his lover? I don't know, but World of Thetis tells us these people exist. So Leto prepared for weeks for the ritual. This Silas was one of 4 guards tasked to watch Leto, and the only one of the 4 to actually speak with him. He described Leto as quiet but surprisingly clever. He was nervous about the ritual, but was comforted at the thought of his mother and sister's freedom. The ritual itself took several days, and apparently took the combined efforts of several of Denarius' most dedicated apprentices. The markings themselves are comprised of lyrium and ink and are akin to rune crafting, per his codex. Fenris makes a lot of references to remembering the ritual and how the lyrium was branded, causing him pain. Now, it's never actually stated in full, but everything that is laid out makes it kind of sound like the lyrium was hand-embedded. The Blue Wraith version. The comics version of this process is that Leto had been placed in a strange sarcophagus rather than having it hand-branded, which this sarcophagus in itself is kind of a lore question at the moment. We're just going to kind of put a pin in it and then not even talk about it in this video, to be honest. If you want to know more about the sarcophagus, you can watch the Blue Wraith videos. So, but yeah, the sarcophagus uses Lyrium swords to create the markings on his skin. The comics go more into this process a bit, including what happens to humans that undertake the process and if a red Lyrium sword is used, but as that doesn't really say much about Fenris, we're just going to acknowledge that that's a thing and move on and talk about it later. But one of the main differences is that the comics show this as being a lot quicker than was previously described. Instead of being able to say goodbye to his family, he wins the contest and boom, in the ritual, no preparation needed. Now, in all likelihood, this has to do more with the medium than the truth, This whole backstory from the comics is largely one single page in an already really short miniseries. If they had the time and space, I'm sure that this scene would have been lengthened to match the version that Fenris tells, of days-long torture that left him the way he is. So I'm willing to give the benefit of the doubt to the series, because the reason to include this bit at all was to let the reader know beforehand that Fenris had been in this weird sarcophagus, and to let the readers who had played Dragon Age 2 know that something had changed. Either way, Leto died during that process. Not literally, but he loses all of his memory, and Daenerys renames him to what we know him as now, Fenris, meaning Little Wolf in Tavine. Slavery. After the ritual was completed, the newly named Fenris was now covered from head to toe in Lyrium markings. These markings give him unique abilities which aren't really well defined or explained, but mostly revolve around him being able to phase through solid objects. These powers seem to be both reflexive and controlled, and he doesn't even know the full extent of his abilities. In-game, his skill tree, Deventer Fugitive, also has an ability where he uses his markings to stun and damage nearby enemies in a radius around him. The markings also glow when he uses his powers, and he states many times that the markings cause him chronic pain, feeling a burning sensation where the lyrium is embedded. They're extremely sensitive to the touch, so he tends to keep his distance from others. About a month after the ritual was completed, Daenerys presented his new project in front of the entire circle of Minrathous, being quoted as saying, "I have transformed a crude elf into a work of art. Behold Fenris, my wolf." Daenerys considered Fenris his prized possession and took him everywhere. Not only was Fenris his bodyguard, but also a testament to Daenerys' genius and skill. He gained renown and influence from parading Fenris around the Imperium. He was a trophy. Fenris also notes that along with bodyguard duties, he also had more typical servant duties as well, like pouring wine for guests. He says that he likely had to do this to intimidate the people that visited the Magister. Now, something that is never actually stated anywhere in the lore, but is rather danced around, is that Fenris was sexually abused by Daenerys. While Fenris never actually says this to Hawke, some of the comments that Daenerys says when he meets Hawke I think really only make sense in this context. Now, this has been debated in the fandom since Dragon Age 2 came out, to the point that David Gator, Fenris' writer, was asked about it at a convention. Not even I could find the original post, meaning it was likely posted on either the now deleted BioWare social network or grew out of word of mouth, but Gator is said to have confirmed that fact. Even that was debated, as it could easily have been made up, but fairly recently a fan and friend of the show, T, made a long, heartfelt post about what Fenris meant to her on Dragon Age Day, which is like, as a fun fact, T was the one that actually thought of Dragon Age Day and spearheaded the movement to start it, so rather fitting that she got a fun answer. But Gator was so touched about her post, behind the scenes he DM'd her about her message. Their back and forth is between them and will remain private, so don't go asking. But T got written confirmation that Fenris is a survivor of sexual abuse. Now, I know some of you may still not believe this is proof, as at this point I'm just kind of asking you to trust in T like I do, because I've known her for a while, and in part that this is a really uncomfortable fact. But if you are choosing to headcanon this abuse away, I'd like to at least challenge you a little bit as to why. Is it because you want your favorite character to not be in as much pain, or do you think that Fenris doesn't look like someone who could be abused? When I talked to T about her message, she brought up this fact, which led me to do some searching of my own, and I came across a fair amount of posts and blogs where people just refused to believe that he was sexually abused because Fenris was a man, because he was strong, or even, honest to God, I saw this one, Daenerys just didn't seem like the type of guy to do that. And one, honey, people who don't seem like the type end up being exactly that type, and two, oh my god, how can you be so wrong about a fictional character? He exactly seems like that stereotype of a guy who would do such a terrible thing that you have in your head to me. Like, he's so creepy. How can you say that? What are you talking about? So why bring this up and drive home that it was true? Mostly because I think viewing Fenris from this angle makes him make more sense, and for a lot of fans this is something that they can relate to. And I think it's important for survivors to see other survivors in media and see his struggles and his trauma, and in the end overcome and still have love and happiness in his life. Despite being Daenerys' favorite slave, he was still subject to mental abuse from his students. One of his favorite pupils, Hadriana, was described to mock him, deny him meals, wake him from his sleep, and all for fun. Now, at one point, Daenerys traveled to Saharan and used Fenris to fight the Canarian Fog Warriors. During a really hairy battle, Daenerys was forced to choose between his life and keeping Fenris, so he actually left Fenris behind. Although, as Fenris puts it, he wasn't happy about it. For the first time, Fenris was free. Lost, alone, and gravely injured, but he was picked up by a group of fog warriors that helped him and traveled with him for some time. The fog warriors taught Fenris many things about the Qunari, Cunlot, how to fight them, and how their society worked, and more importantly, they showed Fenris the idea of fighting for your freedom. But months later, Daenerys was able to find his prized slave. While the fog warriors fought off Daenerys, he ordered Fenris to kill the people who helped him, which he did. This is a story that can be told to Hawke in Dragon Age 2. As Fenris explains, he was basically brainwashed by Daenerys, thinking that staying by his master's side was his only choice, and he still feels guilt about killing those who had helped them. But seeing their lifeless bodies of those he had befriended, he realized that he didn't have to kill them. He could choose to fight for his freedom. Daenerys had been wounded in the battle and could not give chase, so Fenris ran. He ran through the jungle of Saharan, boarded a ship heading south, being chased by Daenerys every step of the way. We don't have exact details on what happened in the time between then and Dragon Age 2. We know that he traveled for a bit, never getting close to anyone and refusing to hide who he was out of spite, but he came to Kirkwall after fleeing from captors in Tanterville. Dragon Age 2. Like all the Dragon Age 2 companions, the short story was released by BioWare, giving a little insight to the character of Fenris before the game was released. While his story is pretty much all about him escaping slavers that were hired to capture him, there is one little insight that is interesting. Fenris doesn't have a lot of respect for elves in both the Dalish camps and alienages. His viewpoint is that both groups squander their freedom, one rolling in the dirt and the other cowering in fear of humans. In his time as a slave, he didn't expect elves outside the Imperium to be like that. This isn't something that is said directly at any other point in the series, and while the ideas do actually come up in banter, they are mostly said to Meryl, which he doesn't actually get along with. So I think some confuses hostility to the Southern Elves to be hostility to Meryl, when in reality both are true. Ooh, fun. 3 years after Fenris escapes Saharan, he meets Hawke. Funny enough, Fenris is one of the more skippable companions, as his recruitment quest is not only optional but vague as to what it is. So if you read the quest prompt and decide against it, you have no idea what you're missing. And here we begin a long list of things that can boot Fenris out of your party, or in this case, you never actually get into your party. But for the most part, if Fenris leaves your party, the two constants that are always true is that he will kill Daenerys and all of his heirs, and that he will be killing slavers around 941 Dragon in the Race of Defender comic saga. Act 1. Sometime in 931 Dragon, Fenris hears that Daenerys has something precious hidden away in Kirkwall. Feeling that it's a trap, he hires a man named Anso to make up a story and hires someone to look into this obvious trap. This is where Hawke steps in, as they receive a letter from Anso for help. If accepted, Hawke steps into the trap and meets Fenris. Fenris then asks for help to raid Daenerys' Kirkwall manor. While Hawke and friends kills everyone in sight, Daenerys is nowhere to be seen. Fenris thanks you, kind of berates you for being a mage or have mages in your party or whatever, and then gives you coin he has, although he states that he owes you more and then is able to join your party. Now, this entire quest is actually optional, and you can still reject Fenris joining your party after starting it. If rejected from Hawke's company, it's assumed that Fenris is on the run for Daenerys for the better part of the decade, but for now it's assumed that Hawke lets Fenris join the group. After killing all the slavers in Daenerys' Kirkwall property, Fenris begins to live in it. And by that I kind of just mean he stays in the master bedroom and literally fuck anywhere else in the building, and those bodies are going to be there for about 8 years. I mean, that's more game mechanics than lore, but you know. But what is in the lore is that he doesn't really take good care of the mansion. And neighbors notice the mansion's condition and complain to the city guard, but thankfully guard captain Aveline is able to deflect their questions. However, she warns him that she can't do this forever. Act 2. In the beginning of Act 2, Fenris' codex states that over the last few years has become more nervous. He's unsure if Daenerys has actually given up the pursuit or if he's planning something terrible. However, he enjoys having a place to call home for the first time in his life, even though he talked to almost no one other than Hawke and the gang. This is also the time when Hawke learns, and I assume Fenris learned this not too long before, because I feel like it would have come up between them before then, but the mansion doesn't actually belong to Daenerys, but rather to Winter Merchant. It's unknown who the rightful owner is, but Fenris assumes that Daenerys had the merchant killed for whatever reason. It's also during Act 2 that Fenris starts to flaunt his knowledge of the Qunari. He's able to speak a little Cunlot, although he's told by Talis that his pronunciation needs work. He knows of their customs and helps Hawke in their dealings with the Arishok. All knowledge that he attained in his travels with the Fog Warriors all those years ago. If Hawke finds a book about Shartan, they can give it to Fenris. How he takes it kind of depends on your relationship with him, but he reveals to Hawke that he was never actually taught how to read.
Jared, could you read number 23 for the class? No, I cannot. What up? I'm Jared, I'm 19, and I never fucking learned how to read.
Hawk can offer to teach them, but either way, later in the game, Hawk can comment on how Fenris is progressing on his reading lessons. The first time that Hawk travels outside of Kirkwall with Fenris in their party, they are ambushed by slavers hired by Hadriana, an apprentice of Daenerys. Fenris then requests that the group hunts down Hadriana, and if Hawk does not comply with the request, Fenris will actually leave the party, and again, in that path we go cut to Blue Wraith comics. Now, assuming that Hawk does chase down Hadriana after the boss battle, she reveals to Fenris that he has a living sister, Verania. Fenris then kills her in revenge, and he is obviously upset at this new information, and he takes his anger out on Hawk no matter their relationship. He then flees the party back to his home. Now, as a quick aside, Verania lives in Corneas, serving a magister named Erimond. This is one of those times where it helps to have captions on, because unless you are really good with maps, you might confuse the magister to be our boy Livius Erimond. However, the two are actually spelled differently, and Livius states that he is from Byzantium, a different city in the Imperium. It's around this part of the story that a romance with Fenris really begins. Now, before talking about the story, in the meta of the game, Fenris is actually one of the harder romances in the series. See, aside from the friendship or rivalry points, the romance flag for Fenris is very picky. If you have slept with Isabella, the game counts you in a sort of open relationship with her, and any romance with Fenris will not trigger. If this happens, you actually need to sleep with Meryl or Anders, whose flags can override Isabella, and then break up with either of them to close down their flags, and Fenris will come to your door. I think this is more kind of a weird glitch in the story, but as it has never been fixed, I think many people take this to mean that if Fenris thinks that Hawk's interested in anyone else, he doesn't think he has a chance and will stay away. Now, real quick, Dragon Age 2 has a different romance system in that there are technically two different paths you can take with a character, friendship and rivalry. While some character paths are wildly different, or somewhat different, Fenris is largely the same overarching plot, but with different flavor text. In a rivalry, Fenris stays antagonistic and is often seen alone and is still upset after his revenge is done. In a friendship, Fenris has more scenes with others in Hawk's gang and seems to be more at peace. The codex entries paint the picture that he is healing from his trauma more easily. After his personal quest, he comes back to Hawk after storming away from them in anger. He apologizes and confides in them that he's deeply bothered by the hate he has buried in his heart from his time in slavery. He begins to walk away before Hawk tells him not to go, and then the two share a night together. However, during their night of passion, Fenris suddenly started to get flashbacks to his life before the markings. This scares him, along with suddenly getting close to another person for the first time in his life, and so he flees from Hawk. Act 3. At the start of Act 3, it's clear that Fenris is antsy in Kirkwall. While Daenerys has yet to show up and Fenris assumes that he is in the clear, it's now well known that a friend of the champion lives in the abandoned manor, and Fenris isn't too keen on that being well known. In both a friendship and a rivalry, Fenris is partly compelled to stay in Kirkwall because he feels like he is in Hawk's debt. In all honesty, I'm a little confused on the debt that is mentioned. I'm assuming that it's the debt of helping him deal with Daenerys' slavers, but there is some banter that Fenris also borrows money from Hawk for gambling and cards, so maybe he takes some money from Hawk. I don't know. After learning of his sister from Hadriana, it's clear that he still thinks of her, but has barely spoken about it to others, nor has left Kirkwall to find her. During his final personal quest, Fenris reveals to Hawk that he had sent a letter to his sister, and that she has now arrived in Kirkwall to meet him. He is scared for multiple reasons, and asks Hawk to go with him. Once there, it's revealed that, while his sister is indeed there and his sister, she has betrayed her brother, as Daenerys promised to make her an apprentice, and she could have been a magister. Does it mean his sister is a mage? I think so, but I don't know, I wouldn't be surprised if Daenerys lied to her and said, I can make you a mage, when she actually couldn't. That's who knows. Which, is also incredibly ignorant of her, because I'm pretty sure elves can't be magisters, but it tracks that she wouldn't have known that, and Daenerys just would lie to her. It's a whole thing. Hawk can either fight the Magister or actually give Fenris back to Daenerys. If Hawk fights Daenerys, Fenris kills him and is so enraged he is about to kill his sister. Hawk can either let Fenris kill her or stop him. If they stop Fenris, she spits out one last fact to Fenris, that he fought for the markings he says is a curse to free her and their mother. But her freedom was no boon. After their mother died, he has no idea what she had to endure, and she wishes that she had his life. Then she flees. If he kills her, that's about it. She's dead, and he never knows he fought for the life that scarred him so. Now, if Hawke gives Fenris back to Daenerys, they will receive a letter from the Magister. He tells Hawke that Fenris is back to his old self, now that his memories have been erased again, which suggests that perhaps it wasn't the ritual that erased him in the first place, but rather Daenerys himself. And he talks of a great gift that he's going to send to Hawke and offers a tour of the Arctis Hall in Rathis if they visit. Now, the funniest part in all this is that there's actually a bug in the quest, and Hawke doesn't actually receive anything from Daenerys after opening the letter. I personally like to imagine that in this scenario, he just either sent something so useless Hawke threw it away, or Daenerys just didn't give a shit and basically said like, oh, it's totally coming. Wait, it's not there yet? Well, the tracking number said it was delivered, so it must have gotten stolen or lost. Oh, well, I'm not sending another one. Tough shit. But yeah. Much with the other past where Fenris leaves, we assume that he broke out again, killed Daenerys finally, and then cut to Blue Wraith comics. Now, after all of this, if Hawke didn't decide to romance someone else and kept the Fenris romance, he will talk to Hawke in his home. If in a rivalry romance Fenris is alone and upset that his revenge on Daenerys didn't satisfy him, and he isn't sure what to do now, and he will finally ask Hawke for forgiveness for ending the relationship. If in a friendship romance, he'll be there with Aveline and Isabella or Varric, who will try to convince him just to move somewhere better. All the friends leave, and Hawke and Fenris will have a chat about the night he left, and he'll also apologize for leaving. If Hawke accepts her apology in either romance pass, the two continue their relationship and you can kiss Fenris in the final battle. Now, at the end of the game, Fenris actually has a few different fates. If Hawke sides with the Templars, Fenris will always join Hawke in the final battle. If Hawke has less than 100% in either the friendship or rivalry path and joins the mages, Fenris will leave and confront Hawke and friends in the gallows on the side of the Templars. Now, Hawke can convince him to rejoin the group, but if that fails, he will later attack Hawke with a group of city guardsmen and technically die, but he comes back in Blue Wraith, so you know that drill. There hasn't been an explanation of Fenris coming back alive, but an easy one would be that the markings hold some sort of healing abilities, or he just doesn't die or something, he just was gravely wounded. I'm not really sure, but this is kind of one of those rare choices in the game, so no one really has paid attention to it, so honestly, I'm sorry if this is your canon. Now, for some odd facts about Fenris that just didn't fit into the script naturally, he likes apples, dislikes fish, he has a fondness for dogs. It's mentioned in banter that he regularly plays cards with Varric, Isabella, Anders, and Donnic and hosts a weekly Diamondback game in his mansion. Isabella describes him as being tall and lanky for an elf, and sure enough, he has a unique hunch animation compared to the other companions, but he is shorter than a male Hawke. Through banter with party members, Fenris is secretly religious. He tells Anders that he never thought about killing himself because it's a sin in the eyes of the Maker. He tells Sebastian that in Act 2 that he doesn't have a strong faith, but by Act 3 he spots Fenris praying in the chantry, although he is an infrequent visitor. In more dialogue with Sebastian, you can tell that while he has a lot of questions and even resentment towards the idea of a Maker, Sebastian's words get him thinking about the possibility of believing again. As for Hawke's other companions, he obviously doesn't get along well with Anders, who will actually approve of you giving Fenris back to Daenerys, and Meryl, who he resents because of her use of blood magic and her choice to turn away from her family, because he feels like he had no choice in the matter rather than she did. He has a good friendship with Donnic, possibly Aveline's husband depending on her choices, and is friendly to Aveline as well. He passes on information on slavers for her to capture, and she helps him keep his home in Kirkwall. He jokes with Varric and Isabella and even flirts with her if not in a romance. By the end of the game, if neither Isabella or friendship are in a romance, they will actually begin to have a physical relationship. Wraiths of Deventer. In the later issues of the new Dragon Age comics, Fenris makes a major appearance. Now, I have a whole series on the comics, so check out that for a major play-by-play on the plot, but to kind of touch on it lightly, and I'm still gonna not as lightly as I'd like probably, but here we go. Around 2 years after Dragon Age 2 ends, Fenris is spending his time attacking slavers in and around Deventer along with his new traveling companion, Shrialis, a Dalish warrior. When freeing slaves, Shrialis tells them that they were freed by the Blue Wraith, another name for Fenris. Now, as a quick aside, some people were disappointed in this name change from Fenris' skill tree in Dragon Age 2, where he had a power called Lyrium Ghost. While I agree Lyrium Ghost actually just sounds a lot better, the name change is actually because BioWare and not the writers of the comic. BioWare argue that the common folk of Thedas would be more likely to call Fenris the Blue Wraith than Lyrium Ghost, and which it's a decision I both dislike and agree with. So I'm kind of torn, but I get why they did it. So one of the things where they didn't go with the cool factor, Lyrium Ghost just sounds a lot cooler than Blue Wraith. Whatever, I get it. Anyway, Shrialis mentions that Magister Nelius I'm going to botch this the entire reading, is buying up elven slaves to train to become mage killers, specialized warriors that are trained to fight mages. Now, Fenris thinks this idea is silly and refuses to let Trialis go train with the Magister, as he believes that the man will break him. Trialis agrees, but seems kind of upset about it. About a year after this conversation, Trialis leaves Fenris to sneak into a shipment of slaves to meet Magister Nenelius. He is then picked by the Magister and is chosen to be trained. 4 years and some plot later, the elven thief working for the Inquisition Vea and the daughter of a Venatori Magister Francesca learn that her father's caravan was attacked by the Blue Wraith and taken hostage. She wants to tell her father that her brother was murdered because plot, so off the two go to find the Blue Wraith. Vea, who is an acquaintance of Varric, feels like she may know who this mysterious figure is, and after some tracking, they finally come across Fenris. Francesca and Fenris begin to attack one another, but Vea is able to calm the situation and explain that he didn't capture her father, but rather Trialis did, and that he is hunting down his former friend. This is where Fenris meets Autumn the Mabari, who he's quite fond of, and fun facts, Fenris's VO actually acted this part out on Twitter.
I've no doubt that she can do this. I have long admired the strength and skill of the Mabari, and you appear to be a very good girl. Yes, you are. Yes, you certainly are, aren't you? You slobbering beauty.
It's also around this time that Fenris had this line. A lot of people disliked this line because Fenris was now resentful that his friends drifted apart and some felt erasure of the Hawk romance. Personally, I think the line makes sense. He has been on his own for at least 4 years without Hawk. His friends busy with their own thing. But I think this line is also trying to be a small character development with Fenris, because he doesn't talk at all about his teammates in the first issue he's in, and by the end he has quickly grown fond of the new team and is even trying to tell stories of the Kirkwall gang. I still think Fenris cherishes his time with Hawk and the Kirkwall gang, and obviously he still loves Hawk. But Fenris is just really lonely after the last few years, and he's more used to looking back in resentment than fondness. After tracking Trialis to a fortress, Fenris learns that the sarcophagus that gave him his markings is back. We get a small look at what happens when a human is given the ritual. They turn more wraith-like, lose themselves completely, and then explode at one point. After chasing and eventually losing track of the sarcophagus, Fenris defends Francesca from her father, although she ultimately has to kill him herself. They also learn that Trialis will be given the ritual at Castle Tenebrius, Daenerys' home. The story continues in the final miniseries, Dark Fortress. The group stays in the nearby city of Nearomenia, and Vea learns that they can find a way inside the fortress from a Daenerys. Remember, Daenerys is actually his last name, not his first name. But what is the main Daenerys' first name? I don't know. We were never told. Anyway, Fenris is furious, as he thought he had ended the line completely, but this man, Tractus Daenerys, is rumored to be a bastard of his former master. He was recently recognized by the Magisterium and able to take control of the fortress. Once they capture Tractus, Vea is able to convince Fenris not to kill him so they can get their information. Anyway, with his information, they're able to get their way inside. Fighting happens, also Canari are there, and they witness Trialis go into the ritual, but instead of a blue Lyrium sword, a red Lyrium sword is used along with the blast of fire from a dragon. The ritual on Trialis is almost instantaneous, and he has clear differences from Fenris. The markings resemble scars from electrical burns rather than the neat markings Fenris has. He is absolutely huge now, seems to have a slight memory of his life before, but doesn't seem to know anything other than violence, and he has a symbiotic relationship to the sword that turned him. As long as he holds the sword, he can heal his wounds. Sir Aaron sacrifices himself to separate Trialis from the sword, and Fenris kills his former friend. In the end, Francesca buries his sarcophagus deep underground with her magic, and Fenris agrees to travel with the two women to keep them safe while traveling to Portsmouth and Ferelden to put Sir Aaron to rest in his hometown. Now, where Fenris is after this is unknown. I'm sure those that romanced him would really like him to go back to Hawk's side, although where that is, though, is unknown. It might be that Hawk is out at the Wardens in the Anderfells, or is still stuck in the Fade. Cut content. Now, Fenris stands out in a lot of ways compared to the entire lineup of Dragon Age companions, but probably the most interesting is that he might have the most amount of cut content that we know about. Now, surely other companions have cut content we don't know about, but Fenris has the most that we do. The first major piece of cut content was the ill-fated Dragon Age 2 DLC Exalted March that was canned. It's been known about for a while, but it wasn't until the recent Bioware 25 book came out that we had a little bit more detail on what it was meant to be, and some of the content that was in it. Most of the content that was revealed didn't have to do with Fenris, but there was a look at his updated model, one that made its way to the World of Thetis books, and it looks like this might have been like a 3D model that was rendered, and maybe what it would look like, I don't know. Eye patch? Anyway. But it also included the idea that Hawk could have chosen to marry their love interest. Now, it's well known that Fenris' design was the hardest to pin down, and his character designer has bluntly stated that he was not happy with the final design, saying that it was the best of the worst that they had come up with at the time. So the design that was in World of Thetis was their attempt to fix what they had done, and the concept carried over to the now canon comics. Now, the other cancelled thing is a book about Fenris that was to be set after Dragon Age Inquisition. It was to be written by David Gator, his lead writer, and at the time the lead writer of the whole series, but was cancelled after he left BioWare. Or maybe before, but we don't actually know when the exact thing happened. But either way, it's not happening. But what was it? Now, it's never been officially stated, but actually not that long ago, Gator took to Twitter to comment on a fan comic that an artist posted. Just kind of because I feel weird about posting the comic without asking the artist, and I feel shy about asking, I'm just going to link the tweet below rather than just show you an image of it. But to sum that up and kind of mix of what Gator says, what I'm taking away is that it seems the plot of this supposed novel would have taken the assumption that Fenris and Hawk were lovers, but Hawk was left in the Fade by the Inquisitor. Fenris then agrees to work with Solus in exchange to get Hawk back from the Fade. While I would be interested in this novel, as I just like any Dragon Age content and I do really like the core plot idea, I feel like part of the reason this was never published was because not that many people both romance Fenris and left Hawk in the Fade. I'm sure you exist, and I'm sure you're going to tell me in the comments, but although knowing this fandom, I feel like many would have actually changed their canons to account for this if this had actually been published. Now, what should probably be noted here, though, is that while this book was never published, if our assumptions are correct, it at least within the realm of possibility that Fenris would work with Solus for the right reasons. Calling back his thoughts on the elven population outside of Tevinter from his short story and the hate of slavery, him and Solus actually aren't too dissimilar from the other, and as Solus also has a small cameo watching from afar of the plot of The Idol in the new comics, he would have seen Fenris in action, and it's even hinted that Solus literally chewed up and spit out the Tenarius bastard in the novel Tevinter Nights. I also get messages every other month or so that Fenris, the name, is based on or from Norse mythology, where Fenrir is a wolf being that is the child of Loki, a trickster god that has a lot of similarities to Solus. Not that I think Fenris is actually his son, I don't think that at all, but that perhaps the two have a connection. So while we have no confirmation at this point, there is a chance that we see Fenris in Dragon Age 4, and he might not be on the side we think he should be on. And that, dear patrons, is all that I have about Fenris. Now, as a quick warning, my next few videos are going to be a lot less lore and more like Dragon Age related oddities, as I've been working on a lot of odd projects in the background that I'm kind of excited to rant about. But do you still have lingering questions, proof that I'm wrong, comments about your own fan theory? Feel free to tweet me at @Goldathon on Twitter or send a PM to user Gillanon on Reddit. Duresh all.